Hello, good morning, everybody. Um, Welcome, thank you for coming on this Saturday morning. My name is Dave Powell. I'm the president of the Wake Audubon Society. We are the local chapter of the National Audubon Society and are, of course, focused on conservation, not only for birds, but for all wildlife in our area. We have monthly program meetings. They are normally the first Tuesday, the second Tuesday of every month. And they're normally in the evenings after the museum is closed, but we do them here at the museum. And so we decided to start off this year by trying to do something a little bit different and do our program meeting while the museum is open and the public is here. And do it in a bit more partnership with the museum and our speaker today. So thank you for coming, regardless of how you found your way here. If you're interested in getting more involved with Wake Audubon or learning about the other kinds of things that we do, I encourage you to go to our website, just Google Wake Audubon. We have a calendar of all kinds of events there. We also have a very active meetup page where you can find information on our bird outings. So we do bird outings in local parks pretty much every weekend. And we also do lots of volunteer like stream cleanups and other kinds of conservation projects like that. We're an all-volunteer organization. So if you're interested in helping out or learning about ways that you can support the organization and our work, come find me afterwards because we are always looking for more hands and minds to get involved. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Chris, who is here from the museum, our host, of course.
Thank you, Dave. Big round of applause for Dave and the Wake Audubon Society. They actually did the work of reaching out, coordinating today's program, bringing our guest speakers into the museum, so many thanks for working with us here at the museum. Wake Audubon Society has been great friends to the museum for many, many years, and I'm happy that we could actually host this event, invite Wake Audubon Society and the public to participate in today's program. So thank you very much. My name is Chris Smith. I'm coordinator of current science programs here at the museum, and I like trees. That's how we'll start off. I like trees a lot. And so for today's program, I'm excited that when Wake Audubon said, hey, we want to reach out, I was like, well, I like birds. They're cool. And then they said, we want to bring in the folks from Leaf and Limb. And immediately I was like, oh, well, that's really cool because that's trees, and I like trees. So I'm very excited for today's program and to have Basil Camu with us, who's actually the co-founder of Leaf and Limb, which you might have heard of, the popular and well-known tree care company here in the area. But he's also one of the founders of a nonprofit that aims to connect people to trees called Project Pando. And working with Wake Audubon Society and Leaf and Limb for today's program is meaningful, not just for me because I like trees, but also for us here at the Museum of Natural Sciences. Because here at the museum, our mission, our goal is to connect people to the natural world, illuminate and inspire nature and conservation for people, not just in North Carolina, although that is much of our focus, but for people around the world. And we can do that through programs here inside the globe, inside the Daily Planet Theater. But right now, for example, if you want to go back and watch this program later, or you say, wow, today's program was a lot of fun, I want somebody else to see this, we're live streaming. You might be watching at home right now on YouTube or from your desk. You can share this, find it on demand on the museum's YouTube channel later. We'll also be taking questions from the chat on YouTube and from our audience at the end of the presentation. So drop your things, your thoughts, your experiences into the chat. And of course, as they come up for all of you here inside the globe, we'll be taking those too. Without further ado, though, let's get into today's program. Let's meet some interesting people who do interesting things out there in the world. Everybody put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Basil Camu.
Thanks for your kind introduction, and thanks everybody for being here. My name is Basil. I'm excited to talk about trees because I too like trees. First, thanks to our hosts, the Museum of Science and Wake Audubon. Thank you so much for having me today. We're going to have a fun program, and also I will just tell you right now, two disclaimers. One, I do very poorly with handheld mics, so if I do poorly today, you just blame it on the handheld mic. And then second, I love taking questions. I traditionally do it during the presentation, but if you'd rather me hold it to the end for a better program, I can do that. So we'll hold it to the end just for the sake of all the folks who are online. All righty, so in order to talk about how we can help heal Earth, we really need to first set the stage for how our natural systems work. And then we've got to talk briefly about how we're breaking those natural systems. Understanding these two foundational pieces makes it a lot easier to understand why we do what we do in the landscape to heal Earth instead of harming it. So let's kick it off, talk a little bit about the basic systems of planet Earth. We first have photosynthesis. And this is a fancy term, of course, converting sun's energy into this amazing usable form. We can give photosynthesis credit for essentially turning what was once a planet full of rocks into what we have now. It all began, if you were to zip way back in time, you would have found a planet full of rocks. When it rained, the rain just washed out to sea. There was really nothing to hold that rain in place. But over time, wind and weathering events broke those rocks down into sand, silt, and clay. Enter the lichens. So lichen are these amazing organisms that we still have today, and essentially what they did is they colonized these rocks and they broke them down even further. And in the process of doing so, many of those lichen died. And the more lichen died, the more they began to accumulate into what was the beginning of what we call organic matter. Organic matter is basically anything that was once alive and is now dead and rotting. So the lichen were the early, this is where photosynthesis first began. And as the carbon accumulated in pools, suddenly the planet started going from dirt, which is sand, silt, and clay, to soil, which is sand, silt, and clay plus life. That's essentially the difference between soil and dirt. So anytime we talk about soil, we're referring to a mixture that has sand, silt, and clay, and most importantly, it has life. The longer this went on, the more accumulation began, and we saw advanced plant forms evolving. Glassworts, liverworts, these gave way to more advanced plants, the things that we see today. We see pine trees, and we see oak trees, and we see flowers and grasses. These are the advanced stages of this progression. And as photosynthesis happened, more organic matter infused with dirt to produce more soil, and this created more and more life, and plants included. Now, the interesting thing about this accumulation of life within dirt creating soil is that it became a sponge. So now when it rains, the water no longer washed out to sea, it could be held in place. And this is a really important feature of soil. It acts as a sponge. When it's dry, there's air pores in soil. When it rains, those air pores fill with water. And this is why I think sponge is the perfect analogy for what soil is. With the accumulation of more and more sponge and more available water, now begins this irrigation process that we see on planet Earth. So the way water moves about is it rains, water percolates down into the sponge. When it's in the sponge, now trees can use that water to photosynthesize. So it's this positively reinforcing cycle. What's very interesting, though, is trees actually help generate their own rain systems. So as they photosynthesize, they release extra water into the atmosphere, and then they chase after that water with a, you know what? One of the downsides of me managing this mic is I forget to use my pointer. So let's actually get it caught up to where I am on this presentation. Like I said, y'all, I am a nomad on a stage. I have to be walking around and I have to be hands-free, but I'm going to do my best here to keep up with the slides. So when this photosynthesis happens, there's this extra water that goes into the atmosphere, and the trees actually send what are called volatile organic compounds. Very long and fancy term, but what that does is it triggers more rain. Then the rain falls back down to ground, so the trees are creating this up and down cycle of water. What's interesting is, as long as there are adjacent bodies of water or adjacent forests, this water moves across terrestrial systems. So trees are essentially in unison with soil and the sponge that holds the water, creating their own irrigation systems. This is why water is able to go from an ocean to the center of a continent, or why when we cut down forests, we see radical changes in our weather systems. I'm not going to get too deep into weather because it gets a bit complicated for this presentation, but if you want to get a copy of my book, which I'm giving away for free, you can learn all about the fascinating ways that water and trees and soil work together to create weather systems. The point of this, though, is that we now have photosynthesis, we have a soil sponge to hold water, and we have now a moving irrigation system. So let's move to the next component of our amazing terrestrial ecosystems, and that is life itself. So plants essentially feed all of life on land, either directly or indirectly. Everything that lives on land either eats plants directly for food, or they eat something that eats plants directly for food. So it is the basis for all food systems. It's also the basis for all shelter. It's a lot easier to understand shelter for, say, a squirrel, because they live in the tree, but even we humans rely heavily on trees for our shelter. We obviously use wood to build houses, and we use a lot of concrete. But to make concrete, we have to use fossil fuels. Currently, the world, 89% of all electricity and power is produced from fossil fuels. And guess what? Fossil fuels are old plants. These are plants from long, long time ago that rotted and decomposed and created beds of coal, oil, etc. So we're essentially using plants to either create the house or create the power that creates the house. So it's easy to forget that even we humans are intricately bound to the land for food and shelter, and this is true for all life on land. And then finally, last component of the system I want to talk about is carbon. Carbon is an amazing thing. It's like the Legos, it's like the ultimate Lego package. For those of you who enjoyed Legos when you were kids, or maybe you still do, I do. They're fun. Well, this is carbon. It builds so many intricate life forms. But how does carbon do that? It has to be pulled from the atmosphere. So many years ago in the Carboniferous period, there was about 1,500 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's about 4 times more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we have now. But something amazing took place. This process I was telling you about, where photosynthesis advanced and soil advanced, it started pulling down faster and faster quantities of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, to the point where we reached 200 parts per million, and it stayed that way for a long time. So carbon is not a thing to be demonized. It is life. We have to have carbon. But the key is we don't want carbon floating around in our atmosphere. We want it sequestered within life. We want it in the trees. We want it in the soil. We want it in the caterpillars that eat the trees, and the birds that eat the caterpillars, and the zebras that eat the grass, and the lions that eat the zebras, and the worms that eat the bird poop, that eats the nematode, and so on and so forth. These intricate life webs are loaded with carbon, and trees are the pump that move carbon. We can think of trees as pumps, carbon pumps, sucking carbon from the sky. We can think about trees as 3D printers. They're the original 3D printers. They terraform the land and create the ecosystems that we love and appreciate, and ultimately that lead to advanced life forms like we humans. Unfortunately, we have a problem. We are breaking many of these systems. Now, I'll tell you, I'm not here to cast doom and gloom. This is ultimately a presentation of hope and empowerment, because there are things you can do right where you live to address serious environmental issues, or whatever issue you may care about. Maybe you only care about birds, and that's great. We can help the birds. Maybe you only care about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Great. We can do it all with natural ecosystems. So let's talk about how we're breaking those systems just briefly. So we started off with photosynthesis. This is sort of this key. It's the pump moving carbon. It's the pump moving, creating life. It's creating soil. Well, problem is we are destroying photosynthesis. Just in the last pick your time period, doesn't really matter. But half of all forests and grasslands are gone from what there once was pre-human. That means, just simple math, our pumps are decreased by half. We've also, just in the last 150 years, denuded, degraded, lost, eroded, pick your mode, our soils. That's really important because it means not only is all that life gone, but our sponge capacity to hold water is decreased. We can see this directly here in North Carolina. All the flooding that we've been seeing, that's because of 300 years of agricultural practices and current development practices. There's no soil sponge to hold water, so what does it do? It rushes off to the oceans. Interesting fact, in the 1900s, so 1901 to 1999, we farmed, this is globally, 1 billion acres of land into complete oblivion, to the point where that land has been just left alone and abandoned, and it's so denuded it cannot even be used anymore. That's just to give you a sense of, we often forget that with 8 billion humans, we can do a lot in a short amount of time, which includes losing half of all of our soil in 150 years. Unfortunately, with that lack of sponge that I was alluding to, that means water is going out to the oceans, not down into the ground where we want it. Because guess what? Deep in the ground, we have aquifers. Aquifers hold drinking water. They're also where tree roots and long grass roots will go to find water. So we're sort of just breaking that irrigation system that I described, and unfortunately our aquifers are running dry. NASA monitors global aquifers. We have 37 that are very important. Here in the US, our two most important are in the Midwest, and they're in California. Well, unfortunately, y'all, 21 of our 37 aquifers are running dry faster than they're replenishing. We're seeing some really, if you pay attention to the headlines right now, Mexico has been going through a huge water crisis over the past year. Istanbul, South Africa nearly ran out of water in 2019. India's got major sectors of water deprivation. When we talk about running out of oil, that's nothing in comparison to running out of water. And then of personal tragedy to me is just the loss of life. So within the last 40 years, we've seen a 60% decline in all life. That actually includes seas, lakes, etc., all life. So we're seeing this trend, roughly half of all photosynthesis gone, roughly half of all soil gone, more than half of our aquifers gone, more than half of our life gone. You can see the pattern here. It's because the systems all work closely together and they're intricately woven together. And then finally, carbon. You know, we often look at carbon dioxide as the culprit. It's actually not. It's a symptom of this more serious issue, which is that we're breaking the natural systems. With sufficient photosynthesis and sufficient soil, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere ceases to be a problem. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is a byproduct. And yes, we are absolutely burning fossil fuels. We need to focus on that 100%. But we also need to think about the powerful engines that drive this planet. Photosynthesis, soil formation, abundant populations of life. This is where carbon is supposed to be. And what we're essentially doing right now is we're rewinding back to the Carboniferous period. So could we see 1,500 parts per million in the atmosphere? Absolutely. I mean, it was precedent. It's happened on the planet many times. It really just depends on how abundant are our plants, soil, populations of life. Which is the perfect segue to take us from that depressing moment. Oh, it gets more depressing. There we go. That was the low point. It's all uphill from here, or downhill, whichever way you prefer. So the path forward is really simple. Now that we understand some of these basics of the natural systems, let's work with those systems and help heal the issues. And the cool thing is, especially in the landscape, I like to make the analogy of the current way we do landscape is like swimming upstream. You're gonna work really hard and you're not gonna get very far. If instead we can flip it on its head and work with natural systems, now we're swimming downstream. we're using a lot less effort and we're getting a lot further. So even if you don't care about any of these topics, maybe you enjoy watching more football on a Sunday, or maybe you enjoy saving $500 a month. These are great things. Well, working with natural systems to do landscaping and work in our suburban landscape, it has that outcome too. So again, pick your point of interest. It can be time, it can be money, it can be carbon dioxide, it can be birds. We get lots of really amazing outcomes when we simply start working with natural systems instead of against them. So I want to talk about some specific ways that we do that. These are practical things that I hope anybody can do. And I'll also mention these are things that we've been doing at Leaf and Limb and Project Pando for a long time, so we know they work. I want to first bring your attention to planting native trees. So this term native is going to be something that most people here will know, but if you don't, the idea of a native tree is it's a tree that's been here a long time, so it feeds a lot more life. It's kind of that simple. We can make it a smidgen more complicated. If I'm a caterpillar from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I travel to Beijing, I cannot simply go eat a leaf from a tree in Beijing, because that tree does not want to be eaten. It doesn't like to be eaten. Nothing does, really. So it defends itself. It produces chemicals, really sophisticated systems. Some trees will actually signal to wasps that, hey, I've got a caterpillar here if you want to come kill them. And then the wasps will fly in and they will kill the caterpillar, and boom, tree's done its job, it's defended itself. There's really amazing defense systems out there. But again, I'm a caterpillar in Beijing, I want to eat a leaf, I can't. It's going to take me, it just depends, there's a lot of different estimates, but let's just go with, say, 100,000 years to co-evolve with that tree and figure out how to get past its systems so that I can eat from the tree. Well, after 100,000 years, I'm just using this number loosely, I now can feed abundantly from that tree, which means there's a lot of other things that are feeding abundantly from me. Some birds are now being fed. Some raccoons are being fed, if they have raccoons in Beijing, et cetera, et cetera. So we want these trees that have had a long time to co-evolve with life, because it means they're feeding more life and they're housing more life. Y'all probably all know the crepe myrtle. It's a popular one here. I'm even going to throw the Japanese maple into the mix, even though everybody loves Japanese maples. But Japanese maples are shown to only feed less than 10 insect species. Whereas an oak, which has been here, a white oak specifically, which has been here for a very long time, research estimates that they feed more than 1,000 different insects. So think about now the webs that start forming off of 1,000 insects versus 10. It's worlds of difference. And here's where we get the bridge back to carbon. If a tree's feeding thousands of insects with large food webs, we're distributing carbon back into the ecosystem, the terrestrial ecosystem, at a much faster rate, and we're building populations of life more quickly. So we really do want to think about native plants. Loosely speaking, if it was here before Europeans were here, it's probably native. But let's also talk about saplings. So not just planting trees. I'm actually a really big fan of these saplings. So we're going to talk about Pando later, but whether you grow them using the Project Pando model, which we'll talk about, or you buy them from one of our local native nurseries, and we have some great ones, I think saplings are much better, because several things to understand about a sapling. First of all, it has a beautiful root system. When you put a tree into a container and you grow it there for a long time, that root system starts getting bound up. That's a problem for a tree. So we bypass the root system problem. Second, it takes a lot less resources to grow a sapling. Nurseries are very energy-intensive operations, a lot of irrigation, a lot of fertilizers, et cetera, et cetera. Third, nursery operations often baby their trees because they need to produce big trees fast. So they fertilize them and they irrigate them. Well, when those trees get in the natural landscape, they're not prepared for what comes next, which is North Carolina's hot summer. It is a rude awakening, and this happens all over the place, not just North Carolina. This is why 50% of all containerized, these are these nursery containers, and balled and burlapped, which is these massive plants. You probably have not planted a balled and burlap. That's usually a commercial grade planting. But that's why more than the average death rate for these trees in the suburban landscape is 50%. Half of them die. And The average lifespan for a tree in the suburban landscape in USA is 40 years. An oak can live for 1,500 years easily. Our pines, our loblolly pines, normal lifespan is 300 to 500 years old. Our red maples, in their normal ecosystem, they'll live for 500 to 700 years. So when we're getting 40 years from our tree, we've spent a lot of resources to grow the tree, a lot of effort to plant the tree, and then it doesn't even make it, and we don't get any of those long-term benefits that we're looking for. So just save yourself all the time, all the money, all the heartache, and plant saplings. They're way better. Here's another easy one. Oh yeah, let me show you a couple of photos. So this is a 1-year-old oak sapling. If I was to geek out a little bit, I would just tell you all that dark stuff you're seeing, these are aggregates. This is bacteria and fungi, just rich with life. I mean, that is, from a professional standpoint, such as my own, just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. That root system there on the right, absolutely incredible. I mean, you're just talking about one of the healthiest. And these trees go on and they live incredible lives. They're not baby, they have great root systems. They already have a great soil ecosystem beginning. But now let's talk about another place where you can make a big difference, and that is saving existing trees. I always like to talk about the fact that if you want a 350-year-old tree, there's no money in the world that can buy you a 350-year-old tree. Not unless you buy the land that it's on, but you can't buy the tree. Only time can buy a mature tree. So what is the value of, say, this tree right here, a 350-year-old white oak, that a developer cut down last year in one of the communities that we're working with? It's really hard to put a price on that. And they spent a lot of money removing it. They had an irrational fear that perhaps it was going to cause damage because it's so big. Big trees often scare people. Well, it's counterintuitive, but your big trees are your safest trees. They've lasted through all the storms. They're your safest. People often get scared of trees swaying in the wind. That's normal. Trees move, they get stronger. It's kind of like a human. You move your arms, build some muscle. Trees build muscle too. It's called something different, but it's the same concept. I would estimate, in talking with my colleagues, we have collectively hundreds of years of experience between us in the industry. 90% of all tree removals are unnecessary, or they could have been easily prevented with some proactive protection. For example, we'll get calls from people, my oak is dying, what's going on? We look at the root zone, oh, well, you built that addition to your house and you took out half the root zone, so unfortunately, there's nothing that can be done now. But had they called us a little bit sooner, we could have easily created ways that their contractor could have worked around that or protected the root zone. So really, this is very low-hanging fruit, an easy way to save lots of money and make a really big difference, because had that 350-year-old oak tree still been here, it would be feeding an incredible abundance of life. It would be holding a lot of water. The soil would still be there. All the things that are a part of that tree's ecosystem would still be here. And we would have saved money. All right. Next on deck is, we talk a lot about pruning, but there's really only one pruning that actually matters. If you're going to spend your money on pruning, yeah, perhaps you need to get something off the siding or a roof, but don't waste your money on anything except structural pruning. And let me tell you why, but first I've got to tell you a story. If you're a tree growing in the forest, you're working really hard to get sunlight. You're having to compete with a bunch of other trees that also want sunlight. So as these trees compete, they're growing up straight and tall, straight for the sky. And when you walk in the forest, you'll often see that trees have very straight trunks with small, well-spaced branches, and that's a result of the competition for sunlight in the forest setting. But take that same tree out of the forest, put it in the suburban landscape, and now it has a lot of sun. It doesn't have to compete, and it starts to grow in unnatural ways. As a matter of fact, even this oak that I really do love shouldn't necessarily have such massive limbs off the side. This was planted somewhere near the start of agricultural practices in North Carolina, so it was not competing for sunlight, and it grew like this. But if you find that same white oak in the forest, it looks different. It looks straighter, smaller branches. And that's good. That's how a tree withstands wind. So if we're going to spend money on pruning and we want our trees to live a long time, we should do what's called structural pruning. It keeps them stronger in the face of storms. That means less risk to our homes and cars and pedestrians. And it also means that tree can stay with us for a longer time, because if it does split in a storm, not only might we have damage to our personal belongings, but we also lose the tree. So it's a win-win. I'll talk just briefly about what is structural pruning. And again, all of this is in the book in great detail. The book is at heart a do-it-yourself guide, so you can do a lot of this. So the first bit about pruning that I always like to mention is there are what are called good pruning cuts and bad pruning cuts. If you make a good pruning cut, the tree will heal. If you make a bad pruning cut, you will have a hollow in your tree. So I don't want to get into that. That's very, very fundamental. Yes, in the book. Instead, what I want to talk about, oh yes, here's an example. On the left, proper pruning cuts, you can see those white spots. It's sealed. There's no hollow space in the tree. But check out the right side here. That was an improper cut, and we now have this hollow decay happening. Unfortunately for that tree, one bad pruning cut sentenced it to a death 10 years later because it became structurally unstable, and now it was a real hazard. So we don't want to kill our trees by pruning them. I alluded to the forest versus the suburban landscape. This is the same species tree, both red maples. Left is a forest red maple, right is a red maple in a neighborhood in Raleigh. You can see the difference. One has a strong central trunk, small branches, well spaced. On the right side, we see this tree with these abnormally large trunks. And guess what? They split. I am sure everybody here could tell a story about a tree that looks like that one that's split in their neighborhood or somewhere that you're familiar with. So what we as arborists and what you as homeowners or property managers can do is, starting from a young age, you can train your trees to look and grow like the forest-grown red maple. It's not terribly hard to do. We essentially make pruning cuts that reduce competing trunks and branches. That's sort of the idea. Don't want to get too technical. We could do a presentation about that, but the short of it is, structural pruning aims to produce trees that look like the forest-grown maple, so they can live a long, safe life. And it aims to avoid trees that look like this one on the left, which will cause damage and die prematurely. That's the short of it. If tree structure produces strength, and it does, then soil is what produces health. So if you want healthy trees or shrubs or whatever the plant may be, it originates in the soil. That is how you build a healthy plant. And it's not complicated. The only reason it seems complicated is because there's a lot of companies trying to sell you products and services. But it's really basic. We can go all the way back to the beginning, or we could even just take our minds out to a forest. What happens in a forest? It's pretty straightforward. Leaves fall. They feed that life in the soil, and then the life in the soil helps take care of the tree. Branches fall, trunks fall, it rots. Animals die, birds die, it rots. All of that rotting action is what produces really healthy soil. That's it. Ask a tree its 3 favorite foods, it'll probably say carbon dioxide, leaves, and we'll say arborist wood chips as sort of this placeholder for branches and twigs and things like that. It's just really basic. We don't have to get fancy. So if you want to save yourself a lot of money and time, ditch all the fertilizers, ditch all the products, leave your leaves. You don't even have to blow them or rake them in the fall. Or if you want them off your grass, just move them into beds under your tree. So you just save yourself a lot of time, a lot of money. You build a rich and healthy soil, and now your trees are healthy. It's kind of a win-win. I want to show you a few of these products that I've been talking about. So these are called arborist wood chips. You can get them for free from any tree service. They more or less mimic the falling branches and trunks that would be in a forest ecosystem. I like them a lot better than processed mulches because processed mulches come with problems. Number one, processed mulches become waterproof. That is very bad. You do not want your mulch around your tree to be waterproof. Now that's actually hurting your tree. Second, there's a lot of energy that goes into production, which is just unnecessary. A triple shred mulch is called a triple shred mulch because it goes through a grinder 3 times. And these are massive machines. So you can just, and then number 3, arborist wood chips are free, and they'll deliver them to you for free. So these are all wins for me. And the cool thing about arborist wood chips is they hold really well on slopes because they begin developing these fungal mats that are porous to rain, which is good, and keep the wood chips in place. So I actually find they have the best holding power as well. We could probably do a whole presentation just on arborist wood chips. We're going to leave it there. I want to show you another product that I really love. You can get this at any of your local trees. It costs approximately free. These are leaves. 50% of all the tree's nutrients are in those leaves. It needs the nutrients. The life in the soil needs the nutrients. It's this, we have a misnomer that we can directly feed a plant nutrients. It doesn't work like that. Ecosystems are indirect. Trees get their nutrition indirectly through their relationship with life. You cannot simply feed a plant directly. It just doesn't work like that. Our ecosystems are they're complex. So the best thing we can do is, with all the nutrients that are in those leaves, let them rot in the soil to feed the fungi, the bacteria, the earthworms, etc., and then they will poop and die. I always like to be able to say poop in at least one presentation. And that is what produces what are called plant-soluble nutrients. That's how they get their nutrients. And then finally we have compost. You can get as fancy as you want with compost. Again, products. But compost doesn't have to be complicated. You can literally, I think I have a photo of this. Do I? No, I don't. Okay. You can literally just find a corner of your yard and just throw it all in the pile and walk away and come back a year later and you'll have some great compost. You don't have to turn it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be picky about what goes in there. It's real simple. If it rots, it's great. Now we mentioned the putting wood chips around a tree. What you don't want to do is this. I just always have to add this one. You see it all over town. It's become a normal practice. But this is another way to pay to kill your tree. Long story short, the tree trunk cannot be surrounded by dirt and mulch. If it's left in this scenario, it rots the trunk and it kills it. A little more complicated than that, but that's the easy way to understand it. So again, we don't want to kill our tree with bad pruning cuts, and we don't want to kill our tree with bad mulching practices. This is how it should look. This is a Museum of Art. They've done a great job with their tree care. Notice how it goes out to the edge of the canopy. That's fantastic. Those are arborist wood chips, free product, taking advantage of an existing waste stream. That's fantastic. If I was to be a little bit persnickety, I would just say I would want to add some trees and shrubs under this if possible. Because when we have trees and shrubs underneath a large mature tree, now a lot of insects, particularly moths and butterflies, can finish their life cycles on the understory trees. Many insects need an understory to finish their life cycle. Speaking of which, let's talk about just some other quick and fun things that you can do to help promote life. And why do we want to promote life? Because more life means, assuming you don't actually care inherently about life, which I do, but it does mean more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It means we're building more soil, we're building richer ecosystems, we're solving environmental issues. I happen to think there's inherent value in all life, so for me, that alone is enough. So here's some interesting things. Oh, there's the picture I was looking for. This is the back corner of my yard. Notice the 2 pallets there. I simply took 2 pallets and I used a little straight iron with some bolts and put them together to make a corner. I throw all my food there. And then all brush and all woody material, I leave it on site. Brush piles, not only are we holding onto our carbon, but we're also creating habitat for salamanders and birds of all varieties, so more life. Chunks of wood are a favorite place for beetles and all manners of additional life. So each little type of thing we can leave in our yard is another ecosystem, another place for life to live. We're promoting outrageous diversity. I love this term. We want to promote outrageous diversity of life on our properties if possible. So Brush piles and wood piles and food compost is a great way to hold onto our carbon and achieve additional ecosystem strength. This is a picture from space. Something like 25% of the US is now subject to light pollution. Light pollution's a real problem. Birds can't migrate. It messes with their sleep cycles, their reproduction cycles. Moths will fly to exhaustion. Mayflies think that the shimmering pavement is a river and will lay their eggs. Light pollution is contributing to what has been a massive decline in life for birds and insects. So something simple, we could have lights that have sensors. So when you walk by, it turns on, and then it turns off when you're gone. Some of the really sophisticated cities out there have all of their municipal lighting on automatic systems. That would be a cool thing at a sort of a municipal level. All right, let's look at another one. Mosquito sprays. Doesn't work. All you're doing is you're spraying a neurotoxin onto your property that's really bad for you, your kids, your pets. The research shows that it kills maybe 10% of mosquitoes. And if we start kind of thinking about it logically, we can only really spray our yard. What about the neighbor's yard? I'm pretty sure the mosquitoes don't care about the property line. And then what about the neighbor's yard? So maybe we just need to spray the whole neighborhood, or why not just fly planes over the city and we can just spray neurotoxins on everybody? But I'm joking, of course. They don't actually work because mosquitoes live in little puddles underneath English ivy, in the gutters that need to be blowed or cleaned out, in buckets of water. So really, there's much better ways to go after mosquitoes. Really, the best ways are eliminate any standing water, keep your gutters clean, and then if you still need protection, put on a spray. We have an awesome company here in town called Murphy's Naturals. They make the best mosquito spray there is. Really fantastic company. It's not harmful to your skin. So point of contact is the best way to prevent mosquito attack. And then this one catches people by surprise sometimes, but kitties, unfortunately. We all love kitties, but they gotta stay inside. They are terrorists outside. They kill all manner of birds and small mammals, often just for fun. The estimates on how many birds they kill each year ranges from single-digit billions to double-digit billions. This is an easy thing. Keep your cats inside. And then finally, invasive plants. Now, this is a bit of a tough one, but some of y'all have the energy and ability to do this. But if you can keep your invasive plants to a minimum or non-existent, it's great. Yes, they do photosynthesize, so there is value. But again, these plants aren't from here. A crepe myrtle is a wonderful tree in Taiwan, Japan, and China. I've seen it in its native habitat. It's really cool. And it feeds a ton of life there, but it doesn't do anything here. English ivy, same deal. It doesn't help here. And actually, it's even worse. Not only does it not feed life, but many of these species are so powerful because they have no competition that they actually take over ecosystems. So they're doing the opposite of what we want, which is they are reducing diversity. We do not want to do that. We want to promote outrageous diversity. All right, we're down to the last 3 points, and then we're going to do questions, which is my favorite. I love questions. Make sure you're typing your questions, because I want at least 100. All right, so guess what the #1 crop grown in America is? It's not corn, and it's not soybeans. It's actually grass. We use 1/3 of all available public water to irrigate our grass. We use billions of pounds of fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides and miticides and pick all your favorite sides to take care of our grass, which creates catastrophe. We have a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico the size of the state of Maryland from fertilizer runoff, which is due partly to agriculture but partly to lawns. All this, we spend billions of hours a year mowing these lawns using mowers that are not regulated by EPA. So a mower actually emits 10 times more emissions than a car. This massively destructive, and we're all spending our money for this, by the way. This doesn't happen for free. For, drum roll, 10% of Americans actually spend any time in their yard ever We can turn the whole system on its head. We can do none of that, save all of the money, not use any of the sides, not use any of the fertilizers, and instead we can plant native grasses and flowers. It's a process that's very similar to planting a lawn, and then once it becomes established, you don't have to do any work. So there's lots of parts of my story, but a big part of my story, kind of what led me to this system, is just the fact that I really hated mowing, and I needed a way out of mowing. I don't think anybody enjoys mowing. If you do, excellent. There's plenty to mow. But for those who don't enjoy mowing and maybe want more time on a Sunday, this is a great system to save yourself some time and money. And more importantly, what this does is, let's look at some photos here. Just before we dive into the photos, what it does is it builds very deep soil. These plant roots often go 10 feet. So we have a lot of soil. We have a lot of life in the soil. We have that sponge we're looking for. We're holding water. We're feeding life. We're getting all the things we care about. And we're saving all that money, all that time, and not using those products. There's so much. So this is kind of what it looks like at the beginning. It's not very attractive. It gets better over time. You can see here's a comparison to, this was before we began, and below is the first year. It's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but there's a lot of yellow in the bottom. It's quite beautiful. And it only gets better from here. Each year gets more colorful, more dazzling. Here's another system. This is my front yard. And here's those roots I was talking about. Now, people often miss it. Can you find the grass root system? It's that little furry caterpillar-looking thing at top left. That's the grass roots. That's turf grass, rather. I shouldn't say grass, turf grass. Native grasses are many of these other plants that are represented. Now, you can only build soil to the depth at which your roots grow. If there's no roots, then you don't get soil. It never changes. My parents have been living at the same place for 30 years, and my dad's a routine mower. He doesn't use any of the chemicals or anything like that, but he mows. Actually, for most of that time, me and my brothers mowed, but now he mows. And I actually planted a tree for him recently. I was curious to see how it would look after 30 years. I dug in the ground, and not an inch of soil formation past those short turf grass roots, which of course makes sense, but it was interesting to see it firsthand. Again, if photosynthesis is what drives soil formation, then of course we can't have soil formation further than the root system. So this is why we want these deep-rooted native plants. Here's a beginning of the food webs. On the left, we have a meadow habitat. On the right, we have a lawn. And we just really couldn't get more on the screen, but it actually gets vastly more complex on the left. This is just a hint at sort of what the life that comes from a meadow versus turf grass. The other thing I'll add is, in my book, I talk a lot about planting these systems from seed. So the norm has been to plant them from plugs, which is great if you have the time to manage it. Very challenging to plant these systems from plugs. The maintenance is very difficult. And especially if you're working in large areas, we have developers that are doing acres of these meadows. You could never even begin to work with plugs. So I strongly recommend working with seed. It's cheaper, it's easier, and you can use the same tools and techniques that you would with any normal turf grass operation. All right, second to last. Just like native grasses and flowers are an excellent replacement for the turf grass, I would argue that planting an abundance of native saplings is a better way to plant a bed. So often you'll see a client plant, maybe in a space this large, we might see 1 or 2 large oaks planted and maybe 5 or 6 smaller shrubs planted. We've already talked about how challenging the planting can be for those larger trees, so we'll sort of bypass that. But think about the maintenance in this bed. If you just plant a handful of trees, you're going to end up doing a lot of maintenance. We see this with our clients. They're adding new mulches every year. They're spraying herbicides to keep the weeds at bay. They're doing edging. There are all kinds of activity that happens in the bed around a tree. And again, we're gobbling up resources and we're gobbling up time, and we're often creating a lot of these downstream impacts, So we can turn all that on its head fill the entire area up with these young native saplings that are very easy to plant. And then as these saplings grow up, the canopy closes, and there's no maintenance requirements for these spaces except pruning on the edges. And that will happen with any tree. You're going to have to do some pruning. But we get rid of the remulching and the edging and the weed control and all the other activities that we do in a given planting area. Here's the other thing. You really don't spend any more time and money loading an entire area with saplings versus planting a few large trees. Also, the really cool thing is check out this progression. So this is what they look like at the beginning. So they're pencils, and some are larger than pencils. This is 5 months old. Already some pretty wild growth happening. So the camera is sitting on a picture post. So these are the exact same positions across time. This is 16 months old, that same space. So we're talking about now, we're only in the second growing season. And then 28 months later, we're in the third growing season. We have an actual little forest here. Trees grow better together. It makes sense, right? They come from the forest where there's lots of species diversity. When you have lots of native trees and shrubs growing together, it's the rising tide that lifts all boats. They share nutrients. They provide all kind of benefits for each other, so they grow much faster together. So we can fill whole areas very quickly. Maybe you have a stream buffer, or maybe it's a development company that needs to replace some forest they cut down. This is one of the fastest ways we can achieve these sorts of objectives. I also like this system for privacy rows. We call these thickets. It's the exact same concept, but we are using species that only grow to about 20 feet tall. So mostly shrub species. Same idea. So when this began, they looked like this. And now this thicket is 5 months old. This is between two houses. It's being planted as a privacy row. 16 months old, where we've got the camera in the same spot on a picture post. And boom, 28 months old. This is the third growing season. It is totally filled in. We have a full privacy row between these houses, and guess what? It's got 30 different native shrub species. Lots of bird life happening there, lots of insect life. It was not any more expensive to the client. Same price, same efforts, faster outcomes, but much better for planet Earth. Okay, final little bit here. Just have to talk briefly about Project Pando. This is our nonprofit. So Leaf and Limb funds this work, and we have a lot of fun collecting native seeds. We work with people in the community. Many of you have actually brought seeds to us, and thank you. We collect native seeds. We raise those into saplings. The reason I mention this is because we've developed a blueprint on how to do this work. We put it in the book. It's section 5. We spent 4 years mapping out exactly how to do this in an effective way. We've put it in a book because we want you to use it. Whether it's for yourself at your house, growing your own trees and shrubs just for fun, or maybe you want to engage your community, colleagues, neighborhood folks, school folks, whatever it looks like. This is something that anybody can do. And when you do it, it's a lot of fun. And guess what? You're producing amazing young native saplings that can be planted. So just some photos of what we do. These are the beds that we use to raise these trees. These are some seeds being planted. This is what the bottom of the bed looks like. I don't want to go too far into this, but I'll just tell you they're called air pruning beds. And the idea is that, so this box would be flipped over. When the roots hit the air in the bottom, they stop growing down, and they start growing sideways. And it gives you a really beautiful root system. So it's a very effective way to grow young trees with excellent root systems. This is some leaf and limb folks processing seeds. And this is a bunch of red buds that have grown up out of one of our boxes. The other thing I'll mention is the substrate that we use is leaves from Raleigh's waste collection program. So City of Raleigh they bring us an endless supply of leaves that come from curb pickup. So another great way to incorporate an existing waste stream, and it's the perfect substrate for young trees because, of course, they like to grow in leaves. That's what we see in the forest. So by simply changing how we think about landscape paradigms, we can save ourselves time, we can save money, we can help heal Earth, and hopefully we can also find some joy in the process. So I want to take some questions, and I assume that will come from Chris. And I also want to apologize again for my shakiness on this hand mic. This is a growth point for me. I'm gonna go home and practice with the handheld mic. But yeah, let's get some questions from the audience or from online, however you want to do that.
Well, I think you did a great job with the mic. Let's give Basil a great big round of applause first. Amazing stuff. Incredible work. Yeah, we've got questions. I see hands going up. That's awesome. And I've got the chat pulled up on YouTube so you can type stuff in there. The way this will go is, yeah, just wave at me if you've got a question. I'll actually bring you a microphone. That way everyone in the room and online can hear. If you're up on the balconies, you can ask too. Just wave down at me, and then we'll call on you, and then you can yell, and we'll repeat the questions into the microphones as well.
I actually have 3 questions. Is that all right? What do you think of clover lawns?
Clover's a very, very tricky plant. It is hyper aggressive. We struggle a lot with clover. I would recommend not doing a clover lawn. Now, if you're comparing it to a highly manicured patch of turf grass, getting all the fertilizers and all the pesticides, herbicides, miticides, etc., I'll take the clover. I like the mindset shift behind it, but I think it's just the wrong plant.
Okay. Also, regarding like fields for soccer, I play soccer, and like football fields and all that. What do you think is a good solution for having those spaces for people to play in, while also not like disrupting the ecosystem?
I think we need public spaces, and I think they should be Bermuda grass or turf grass. I think it's fine. I think we should have corner parks where people can go to play. So I'm not saying we need to get rid of all turf grass and all Bermuda grass. I don't think there are native alternatives that could possibly work. I've tried a lot. So we're going to have some turf grass, and that's good because we need to gather as a community and have fun and play soccer. But it doesn't have to be, I'm in HOAs every day where there's 1,000 acres of turf grass and nobody out there. That's more where I'm thinking change should happen.
Okay.
Yeah, good questions. Great questions.
You said plant saplings. That's the best option. What's the definition of like height by height or age or whatever characteristic when it's no longer a sapling? You want something a year or younger, or a foot or shorter, or what's the rule?
All of this is like making a salad, not like baking a cake. Meaning, salads are experimental, and you throw a bunch of stuff in there and see what happens, and they're usually pretty good. Baking a cake is really super precise. So I would not say there's a particular definition, but if I was to try to provide a definition, it would be probably the point at which you can deal with that bare root system. So when you get too big, those root systems have gotten so massive you can't replant it. So typically they're going to be less than 3 years old.
Okay.
Do you have any experience with people using native plants or grasses on septic leach fields?
Yes, it works well. We've talked to septic companies. There's no problem with that. These native meadows work very well in those spaces.
So they're not having issues with clogging up the leach lines with the deep root systems. It's beneficial?
Correct. And from the research, they actually do a lot of absorption. So it can be a win.
So you brought up HOAs as something you deal with often. So with more and more of our communities popping up, being in HOAs, are like legal struggles an issue with installing these, or like HOA policies that mandate, turf lawns and stuff like that? Is that something you struggle with?
HOAs are tough. It'll probably be the biggest impediment to widespread change, honestly. I'm seeing more progressive actions from municipalities and county level than HOAs. But there's some really interesting legal precedent happening in Maryland right now. An HOA just won a case maybe 2 years ago or a year ago, and the state essentially stripped away some of those HOA powers. So I think my recommendation would be to check out what's been happening in Maryland. And the group that is in that legal dispute actually has been working on this whole set of documents and legal guidance, et cetera, for other HOAs to use. So I think that it is A, the most challenging aspect of all of the change, and then B, I think we're seeing some hope coming out of Maryland.
To clarify the question about the plantings over septic fields, you're referring to just planting small herbaceous plants, correct? The prairie, not the, okay, thank God.
Yes.
I have 100 questions.
I'll take
No,
100.
No, I'm kidding. So, mulching. We have wood chips from our own trees, and there's a theory to wait a year for them to kind of ferment before you actually use them and put them under the plantings or trees.
Yeah,
Is that true?
you don't have to worry about that. The research shows, so in the decomposition process, decomposition draws in nitrogen. So the fear is that it'll suck nitrogen out of the soil, but the reality is that it affects about 1 to 2 millimeters. It's very, very, very low impacts. So not a thing to worry about. All the positive benefits that come from that far outweigh the minuscule nitrogen draw happening.
Okay. In your compost, how do you prevent raccoons and deer and whatever kind of other rodents? Well, not deer, that's not the rodent, but go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm worried about that.
You can, okay. I've got a system in the book for how to set up a deer protection fence, super easy, using fishing line. It's a mental deterrent, not a physical deterrent. So they touch the line and it spooks them. Probably, and we're going to have to get into the rats. Rats are a reality. I don't usually do this in my presentation, but the truth is, there's several reasons why rats are not really a concern. Number one, and you know, to do rats, we kind of have to get into snakes, which I know people don't love snakes, but
yeah, them too.
Yeah, snakes are snakes and all reptiles are the canary in the coal mine for the health of our ecosystem. So I know it's hard to see a snake because we're biologically programmed to be terrified of them. They used to be one of our top enemies when we were in the trees still. But the reality is that today, especially here in North Carolina, most snakes are not a problem. The copperheads, which can be venomous, they're only accounted for 1 death ever in history. And they tend to live deeper in the woodland system. So if you're going to see a snake in your yard, it's probably going to be a black snake or a king snake. And when you see those, if it's possible, you want to flip your mindset to rejoice because A, you've got reptiles. So that's great. You probably have a healthier ecosystem. And B, they're free pest control for all the field mice and rats. So you really do, when you get this healthy ecosystem, they can actually take care of the rats. But if that doesn't work, in my book, I link to something called the Ulick repeater. And the Ulick repeater is a very effective way to catch rats. So, you know, I probably just created anxiety versus comforting answers. But yeah, if that becomes a problem. Now, I've been doing composting for a lot of years. I guess now, at least it's 2025. So I've been doing this for about 10 years, composting. I have had to deal with rats twice. But with the Ulick repeater, I did not find it to be a problem.
Okay.
And I also live downtown. So rats are not a problem in all places. Really, actually, downtown is where the biggest issue is. We have these things called Norwegian rats that are from DC, which are from New York, which are from who knows where, presumably Norway.
Okay. This is my last question.
Yeah, please.
So this is a personal and a more broad Raleigh city issue. The city of Raleigh is currently doing a replacement or installing a new sewer line, mostly along the Greenway, but it happens to go in our backyard. So that's the personal part.
Yeah.
They remove trees. They'll be removing 30, at least, maybe probably 40 or 50 out of our yard. We've asked them to replace with a prairie garden. Why don't they do that more often, or what kind of work can we do? Because I don't see, you can't really, they don't want trees growing back on top of the sewer lines.
There's a lot of challenges with laws. Like North Carolina especially is an interesting place. The state holds a lot of power here. So oftentimes, city of Raleigh is bound by the state on things it cannot actually do, which is a whole layer of complexity. Then you've got the complexity of bureaucracies that move slow and they're challenging and you have to get permission, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got the problem of lack of knowledge. But I will say, to Raleigh's credit and every other municipality in the area, these topics are being discussed. It's hard for me to answer that question because the systems are so vast and complicated. But the best thing I could say is just attend your city council meetings. Even a few voices can make a difference. The CACs, I think, are coming back online. So get involved. And on some of these topics, literally 1 or 2 voices can make a difference. Also, I want to bring your attention to something called a Unified Development Ordinance. That is where the magic happens. And right now, City of Raleigh is doing what's called a comprehensive plan. And that comprehensive plan is going to inform the UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance. The Unified Development Ordinance is what holds the developers responsible. And these are things that nobody knows about. So 1 or 5 diligent citizens submitting, right now Raleigh's taking comments for the comprehensive plan. I'm on a committee called the Sustainable Wildlife and Urban Tree Committee. There's others. You can get involved in that, or the stormwater. There's lots of ways. And again, it's crazy, but 5 loud voices can steer a UDO. So you want to be thinking about that, and especially right now in Raleigh, and Durham's doing the same thing. Chatham County is doing this right now. Rollsville is doing this right now. Wake Forest is undergoing change. There's a lot of change happening, and citizen voices will make a difference.
What's the expense, say, of a half acre turning it into the meadow or?
The expanse, you said?
Expense.
Got it. Okay, this is a DIY approach, or are you hiring somebody?
Okay. Depends on the answer.
Always more expensive to hire somebody. But what was the space again? About a half acre. So we're talking about 20,000 square feet. I mean, okay, so if you're hiring Leaf and Limb to do it, you're going to be like $2 a square foot for installation and maintenance for 3 years or so to get it established. If you're doing it yourself, it's really just the cost of seed and an erosion control device, and of course your time. I would estimate all in, if you wanted to get some good erosion control, some good seed, you might spend, I don't know, $1,200, $1,500 for half an acre. Hard for me to estimate this on the fly, but not expensive. And then, of course, your time to get it established. But once it's established, it's on its own. All you have to do is cut it once a year in perpetuity. I'm going to put that in perspective. Bermuda grass sod, which is just installation and not maintenance, is $55 a square foot.
Let me get one from the chat. You mentioned that it doesn't matter what you put in a compost pile. Does the preservatives and other chemicals in inorganic foods negatively affect plants when the compost is used?
I'm sure it probably has a negative impact, but it's outweighed by the biological activity in the compost. Most everything eventually rots. I once threw a dead squirrel that I found in my yard into my compost, and the microbes had digested it in about a week. It was pretty wild.
I think you'll be all right. And then when planting a tree sapling, is there any due diligence actions we should perform to see if there are any pipes underneath that would be affected by the roots when the tree matures?
We could do another presentation on pipes and foundations. The short of it is roots don't really affect pipes or foundations. But we do need to think about overhead space. So power lines would matter. So I would say look at your overhead space and look at your growing area. I also do mention a few due diligence items in the book, which again, you can get for free online. You can get our hard copy, which we sell just at the cost of printing and distribution. And by the way, I should also use this opportunity to make sure you know that we are giving away free copies of the book if you want one. We just ask that you meet with us to look at your trees. So it's a free consultation and get a free book. And you can sign up at leaflim.com. Or if you're here physically, you can go see Matt and Patrick in the back and sign up. We'll give you a free book. We'll give you a free health assessment of your trees.
Let's give Basil one more round of applause. Thank you very much. Incredible stuff. Things that I know all of you can take home, do in your yards, parks, communities, and neighborhoods, and I hope that you will. Hey, I also hope you'll come back and check us out here at the Museum of Natural Sciences again. Take in the exhibits, programs, and activities. We're at naturalsciences.org for everything going on here at your state science museum. And of course, let's give it up one more time for the folks from Wake Audubon Society, Dave and Missy. I hope Missy's still around, but who is helping to coordinate and bring this program to all of you today. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Everybody, have a great Saturday, and good luck with your trees and grasses. We'll see you again soon.